Looks like I'm alive. This is Gava Guy. This Hangout was intended to be a Hangout to include a conversation with Trey Jadlow. He and I have had some back and forth on Facebook yet again. He is apparently obsessed with me, and is just kind of trolling my page. He's refused to actually join the Hangout. His taunting of me and saying that I'm chicken. I've shared a link with him, and he is MIA. We were supposed to start 20 minutes ago. For him, I actually waited longer than I intended because call and so I waited. He's obviously, so I'm here by myself, but I intend to discuss that we talked about in this thread. I posted on Facebook just a little comments with the background or whatever, and just the comment was just be skeptical. That's was and I don't even remember exactly what had. Oh, I know what it was. Just I've been out of town visiting with family, and had been in conversation with my dad about scammers, the phone scammers and people that try and get your credit card information or, what have you, or sell you phony products and those kinds of things. And yeah, I just Facebook after that conversation and posted this thing out there, be skeptical, because I think it's good to be, and it's healthy to be a skeptical person and to question and have some doubt when claims are made. Jumps on and says, LOL, to what end? And, I don't think he is skepticism. But I think this is one of those things where he doesn't think that secular people or atheists can have any kind of value without somehow contradicting themselves. Well, to Trey over and over again how value can arise, and that humans are not the only creatures that value things. There's nothing or supernatural about value or having desires or interest in certain aims or goals. But this was the start of the conversation at any rate, and he and I replied. I said to the end of by bad ideas, and jumped back and said, for the purpose of saving the phenomena of existence, and he uses quotes around this, salvation. No. I mean, for one thing, and I point this out, this is not the same thing as salvation as he means it. And I don't know if he's using salvation in some other way, but why even throw that term out there if that's not, I don't even know. And he doesn't explain these things. So he's conflating terms and clear in his communication, which is something that he has been criticized for since his very first appearance in the YouTube and Google Plus community. He intentionally throws out things that um, are intended to be unclear, ambiguous, to throw confusion into the mix, because he doesn't actually care about making points or arguments. This is another reason that he doesn't write out his positions or write out his actual arguments. He resists doing that. It's like pulling teeth. No pun intended, because he's a but but anyway, the answer is when he throws in some mockery and says something about lack of circumspection is stunning. And I didn't see, because he was like serial posting, between, and I was not sure when I was seeing a lot of these messages, so I replied, and he hadn't answered or responded to what I had said, and was just throwing out taunts or whatever, because and he's very critical of anyone else that does anything besides put out substance, but it's fine for him, which is, so he's a hypocrite on that level. And he and I have gone down this path before. I don't know if he doesn't remember our interactions, or if he is intentionally obtuse and refuses. It's interesting when I remind him that we have had conversations about these things before, and ask him to please supply the answer that he thinks I provided. I regret doing that, because it's bad enough when you actually say to stuff words in your mouth. It's so much worse when you actually give him the opportunity to say what you said, because it's way off base, which I learned recently. But anyway, my my reply there was, there are circumstances in which non-existence would be preferable. There are some cases where it's preferable not to exist, and I've explained this to him before. And there's nothing. Existence is okay and even enjoyable, as long as it's not painful, and even when it's painful, as long as there's some hope that you can have some future experience that's going to be enjoyable and tolerable. Existence is fine. But if it's just suffering, and there's, for example, if you have a terminal illness and your existence is going to most likely be by pain and suffering until you die, to prolong existence, and I know in my case I would prefer to be to terminate things before a prolonged experience of pain and suffering. I would want to get my affairs in order if I have enough forenotice to do that. But we do that all the time, and we there are medical emergencies where someone's life could be sustained point with our medical technology as it is, and people will pull the plug, because for a real life and extending it further is just going to prolong suffering. Laws on the books, states and in other countries, that allow for people to terminate their life. What do they call it? Death with dignity or whatever. And that's, I think that's a very good thing. So existence is fine, but it is not the be all end all of everything that we do. And Trey, try as he might to force that view, or put us into that square peg of, or I mean the round hole, the square peg into the round hole, so to speak. He wants to be able to say that that's what it's all about, because we've gotten past that point to even know where he's going with it, because it's just wrong. Um, whatever he's doing there, it's muddled and doesn't make sense, and it's inaccurate. He's just determined to try and brush, and I've heard him do the same with other um, or non-believers too. Um, so and he replied, because I called him out on the conflation of the terms existence and salvation, and I mean, even from his perspective, it doesn't it doesn't make sense, because um, this is the view that I grew up with, that everyone has eternal life. I'm using air quotes around that. Spend eternity in hell, and some people spend eternity in heaven. They're existing either way. And Trey, from conversations that I've had with him, I believe view as far as that goes. So but he doesn't think that the people that are in hell, even though they continue to exist, salvation or received salvation, however he wants to say it. What did he say? He said, I never said you were seeking eternal life. And I just said he's unclear with this and doesn't make sense. And I wish that he would hang out here. And the reason that he's given for not joining me is because he wants mirror rights to every single conversation that we have had in the past. Well, I'm not giving that to him. For one thing, I don't like Trey. I don't care to give that to him. Or giving him an agreement in writing, and he's got it on Facebook, me telling him he could have mirror rights to this Hangout. And that wasn't good enough. He wants mirror rights to all of our exchanges, and forget it. That's too much. I don't care to give him those rights. I've had my content up there. I haven't taken anything down that as far as video content where we've had exchanges and conversations. The last conversation that we had was on his channel. He doesn't need duplicate videos for everything that he's done out there on YouTube. He's had so many videos taken down by atheists and conversations he thinks is an indication that he's won something. It's, I think, more likely that people are just sick and tired of him and don't care to give him more audience than he's already got. And me, I think it's probably valid criticism of me even to say that probably giving him much more time and than he deserves. Where were we? So, oh, and here's the example. I would ordinarily share this thread, but I've had some friends on Facebook jump in who are not part of the YouTube community, and I don't want to disclose their identities and whatever. They don't don't deserve that. Let's see. Let's see. I said, as I've stated in the past, there are circumstances in which non-existence would be preferable to existence. Laws that allow people to make that choice to end their existence. The reason to be skeptical is to avoid pain and discomfort that can be caused by false beliefs. If someone sells you snake oil as a cure, you may suffer for longer than necessary. If someone tricks you into buying virus protection for your computer, you downloaded software that sends your personal information to an identity thief. Emotional and financial distress. Want to believe true things and dispose of beliefs that are false to that I'm able to do so, because having more understanding of the world will help me to avoid pain and suffering. Imagine why else you would want to be skeptical. And to his, if there's something more than that, well, what is he talking about? Or what else would there be? Why else be skeptical? If you care about what's true and don't want to believe baloney, then is your ticket. So that evidence and good reasons to believe that something is true, then then you accept it. There's a Rick and Morty episode. It's an animated cartoon, if you're not familiar with it, with anyway, this young kid and his grandfather, who's a scientist. They go through all these crazy adventures or whatever. There was an alien who came to the grandfather, Rick, and asked the grandfather to kill him. In this alien culture, when you get killed by a great warrior, you have this blissful afterlife. And Rick leaves to go use the bathroom before he kills this alien, just obliging him because that's the request he made. And meanwhile, Morty and the alien guy have this conversation. And forgive me, this has got a few spoilers if you haven't seen this particular episode. But it must be nice. You know that you've got this afterlife, and here on Earth, evidence that there's any kind of afterlife. But for your species, there's clearly some kind of afterlife or whatever. You've got evidence, and the alien looks at him and gets kind of wide-eyed. He's like, evidence? And Morty says, well, oh, if there's something, if you don't have evidence, why would you believe that? And the alien gets this, like, I don't have any evidence. Well, he runs out of the restaurant when Rick comes back out of the bathroom street and gets hit by a car and dies. Well, this comes out of his body, and it's this kind of translucent figure or whatever, and meanwhile there's some kind of grabbing him and dragging him downward or whatever, and he's like, oh no, it's all real, it's all true, and whatever. And Morty says, well, I can't believe that, that's tons of evidence for an afterlife. Why did he say there was no evidence? And but if we saw things like that, if we had, if somebody died and spirits came back, or we saw some kind of spirit rising out of their bodies, or something to indicate that there was something beyond in the body that we have, some kind of communication beyond the grave or something, but there's nothing. There's nothing to give evidence there, and and healthy skepticism is what is appropriate. And until you have good evidence that these things are true, it's irresponsible and irrational to accept them as true. So anyhow, Trey goes on and says, in response to my statement, existence, there are circumstances where non-existence would be preferable. Something I've never said, you're seeking eternal life on existence. Stan, I mean, I explained this. This comes right after that lengthy explaining circumstances where non-existence would be preferable. And I replied to him, because I've also talked about this with him in the past, and I said, we've been over this multiple times. What was my answer? This was clearly a mistake on my part. Don't ever ask Trey to feed you back what you've told him, even when he does that voluntarily right after you have told him. He is so dishonest. Well, he will respond completely different and try and put words in your mouth. It's worse by magnitudes. In this, what does he say? In the past, you have conceded that there is no hope for existence. I've never conceded anything to Trey, to my knowledge or recollection, because I don't think that he has made almost any valid points at all. I may agree, we may have some common points of agreement. I mean, he starts every or hangout with somebody going over the basic reliability of sense perception and whatever, blah blah blah. Yeah, all that's fine. That he's right, it's just a point of common ground. But apart from those things, like from his launching point right after those things, there's are big problems with his arguments and reasoning, and his no hope for existence. I don't know what that means. What does that even mean? No hope for existence. I'm existing. I'm enjoying life. I am not, right now, contemplating death. I'm happily married. Enjoy my family. My career is going well. I am active with hobbies and things. I'm very fortunate, and I'm very comfortable. I don't know what no hope for existence means, and I have certainly not. There's no hope for existence. Existence is terminal. We will die. We all die, and that's it. Well, all the more reason to enjoy this existence that we have while we have it. There was a period of time before I came into existence that really didn't bother me either, and I anticipate after I cease to exist, it won't be dissimilar to that. So there won't be a me to experience anything. So yeah, I don't even know where to go with that. What does that mean? And if Trey were here, instead of chickening out or just being stubborn boob, he could respond to that and maybe explain himself. Um, and I shared it with Trey to join me. Let's see. Apparently, you don't remember. This is what Trey is saying. You don't remember that in this, you concede my point. You are always seeking salvation. Nope. You only stop when you realize there is no hope. Again, you're thinking about, are you using salvation in the terms that you're talking about, or are you using the term salvation? You're using it in a way that is not the standard definition here, I think. It. Why would you use a term in a way that is non-standard and not explain what you mean, if not to hide your meaning or just be obtuse? I mean, this is it's ridiculous. And then he's, putting words in my mouth. Yeah, Trey, you're right, but I don't want to concede. And and I'm fed up. I said my reply there was, "You're lying now, and I'm about done with you. Please demonstrate inaccuracy." All it would take for him to do is provide evidence where I've said anything like that, to a video from conversation with us. And let me see, I don't know if this is on my channel or his. Trey Jadlow and Gava Guy Part 1. I suspect this is my channel. Yes, this is my channel that he posted. And but he doesn't give any reference to within the content there. It's like an hour-long conversation, I think. Minutes. There's no time stamp. There's nothing. Because he posts a video, that means he's won, because he references some conversation. Content within the conversation that he wants to point out to specifically to back what his claim is here. It's just it's ridiculous. And then he claims victory all over the place here. I made an accusation, you declined to rebut, and instead asked for my perspective. You say I'm lying because I have never said anything close to what you're saying. I've not used those words. I have not said XYZ from Trey. And I'm not, concede is not something that I would use even if I thought that you were right, Trey. So probably say, maybe you have a point, maybe you're right, I need to think about that. That's the kind of, those are the things that I would say if it was the case. And if ever you point that I thought was valid, to say, hey, I think you're right. I'm not in this to be the coolest guy or whatever. I'm interested in knowing what's true and what's real. Games. And then, he's painting me, and he criticizes me all the time and saying, that I resort to personal attacks when I point out the fact that, for example, arguments have been refuted over and over, doesn't have any formal education in the subject, the subject matter, and that people who formal education, I include myself there with the caveat that I only have a degree in a bachelor's level, but people who have more advanced education and degrees in the field of philosophy have heard him and have rendered and leveled some of the same criticisms that I and others have. So, he he acts like he has these arguments, and that nobody will give him the time of day or whatever. People have sat down. People have given him opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to present information and arguments, and pointed out. When the flaws are pointed out, he gets silly and laughs rather than thinking about it. I don't know why he's even done that or whatever. But anyhow, I digress. And I point out the fact that he hasn't sourced the content. He says he doesn't have time to source the content or provide a timestamp. What can I do if I haven't said something, and says, prove that I'm lying? How do I prove the negative? How do I prove say something? If you think I said something, Trey, it is on you. The quote or the point in a previous exchange where I said that. What you stated as my view or my opinion is not my view. It is not my opinion, and I have never said anything like that before. You're just blatantly lying on here. So, and then I replied. I said, I've answered this many times before. Either you don't have a memory, you don't pay attention, or you don't care what I'm saying, and or you're just blatantly lying. I've come to believe that more and more as I deal with Trey. It's worth my time answering again. I have not removed any of our interactions from my YouTube channel. You are welcome to reference them anytime you like. Why would I want to give you my video content? I don't want to draw more people to your silly YouTube channel. It's factually true. The reason people seek non-existence, suffering is great, and they have no hope for relief. I've told you this before on more than one occasion. There are laws in existence in the US and other countries. And let's see, he replies, every exchange I've given you has been open sourced for my opponent. I have nothing to hide. However, 50% of my interactions, says Trey, on other people's channels have strangely disappeared. I assert that you have never dominated any of our Hangouts. So this is a why is he using that word, dominated? He has no interest in actual cogency or quality or substance. He's interested in who dominates a conversation. That's what Trey thinks winning is about. I forget where I saw it. He was saying something about how he admired, or I don't know if that wasn't the word he used, but he had some appreciation for Hitchens' style, Christopher Hitchens, but said that as far as intellect, that he thought that Hitchens was lacking. Well, because Hitchens doesn't reference Aristotle or whatever, although I bet in a conversation with Hitchens that he could probably run circles around, or could have run circles around Trey, as far as his knowledge of history and philosophy and things. But I suspect that Trey doesn't think that Hitchens won debates as far as making valid arguments, but he dominated the conversations. What's more important, Trey? Is it more important to dominate the conversation, or is it more important to provide cogent arguments and well-reasoned ideas? It certainly seems like you are more interested in just the spectacle of success rather than the actual content. And it's apparent, it's readily apparent by the fact that you use that word, dominate, rather than that you have provided more well-reasoned arguments and positions. He quotes me, "The reason people seek non-existence is when suffering is great." And quotes from himself from above, "In the past, you have conceded that there is no hope for existence, so you give up." He said, "How is that substantially different than what you said?" The thing that you said were not don't even make sense. As I pointed out before, for existence, saying you may end up losing hope. Existence that is free from suffering. Those are two very different things. Focus is on existence itself, and the focus is on the quality, the experience that you have while you're in existence. So those are two different things. You conceding then that that the quality of existence is the important thing, because that's my position. So if you're conceding that point, Trey, you can go on from there. But that doesn't seem to be what you were trying to say that I'm saying, or you're trying to force into that into my position. That's the difference. It's existence itself versus the quality of the experience while a person exists, and the possibility or the expectation that eventually, even if there is some degree of suffering and pain, that there might be some alleviation of that, and pleasant experience might be restored at some point. Non-existence is preferable. And that's that's the whole point of Christian hell, as a place of suffering. It's not a pleasant existence. It's existence, but it's unpleasant, and that's why it's punishment. If existence was the whole point, then there's no point in hell, because you're still existing. So it's the whole thing is it's self-defeating. He was interacting with a friend of mine. I explained to him why other people, because she didn't want to have a YouTube conversation with him or whatever. And then, he wasn't answering him. I had answered him. I don't know even now, I don't know what he thought that I didn't respond to. And then I don't know, he pulled out, let's see, and respond to some of the stuff that he thinks I didn't respond to before. Yeah, I did respond to this. He's pulled, "Why would I want to give you my video content?" He says, "Every exchange I've gotten, blah, blah, blah." I've explained. One, I don't like you're obnoxious, you're rude, and you're dishonest. And the fact that you want my content is kind of maybe it's a petty power thing, but no, you can't have it. I'm sorry. You made the choice to engage in video conversations before you understood the forum and the possible implications. Still there. You can still reference it. control of my content. We can discuss each video as it comes up, and if inclined, as I've given you permission for this one to mirror, you're welcome to mirror this one. If you had been in, you would be welcome to mirror it. But no. and again, and I say this later, I'm really getting fed up with you throwing a temper tantrum, not having mirroring rights to my content. You know, you don't get it. And I don't trust you, and I don't like you. You're not going to get it, and we are not going to have another hangout on your channel. You reciprocate and sit in on my channel. So you can be a baby and cry and fuss. I was on your channel last. You can join me on my channel. And until then, we can have written exchanges. Or I'll sit here and do this when, you know, we schedule a hangout and you bail. Trey specifically told me 7 o'clock would be fine. And, you know, in spite of the fact that I've had a long day of traveling and whatever, I said yes, we could do this. I'm not going to go too much longer here. I started a little bit later than I had planned, so I'm going to keep on going on this, but I won't go past an hour here. Let's see. He's complaining about his content disappearing. I think there are several reasons for that, and I've stated them already. How it's substantially different than what he said. You don't understand things when they are explained to you, and you continue to push the same nonsense over and over. Yeah, I've even, you know, I've gone back and watched some of Trey's hangouts with other people, with Bert Poole, with Xbox Fiend, and even Alex Malpass and others. And in those exchanges, Trey will even say, atheists tell me that all the time, or, you know, blah, blah, blah. And in the next breath, he'll say something like, you know, my arguments have never been refuted or never been defeated. Those things that people are saying in response to your arguments all the time, things that refute your arguments. I don't know how else to put this, Trey. You don't understand it when they provide the refutation. You know, you say, okay, X has to be the case. Says, well, there are other possibilities. Demonstrate and eliminate these other possibilities. You haven't finished your work. Excluding those things, and I think Karen S. pointed this out. It's called Ipsy Dixit. Just because I say so. It doesn't work that way. So basically just he says anyone can watch our exchanges and see exactly what you do. Yeah, he also at some point, I don't know if it was in this thread or a different one. Well, why is it that he said I'm always the one talking about himself who references these exchanges? All he does is post the link. He doesn't post to the actual content, but he acts as if somehow he won, so it's a point for him. And I think in the next exchange or whatever, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to take and probably just save it to my favorites and just repeatedly post it on anything and say, well, why am I the one that posts this all the time? It's just so stupid. It's a just because you post a link that valid. Ridiculous. I complained that he had listed so many things, several of which I had already responded to, and I guess the ones that I hadn't before I've done now here in this video. Blah blah blah. There's some other exchanges there and forth with some of my friends. And there was I don't know if it was I'll look back real quick. Oh yeah, he private messaged me unrelated to this about I should say unrelated to the content that came previous in this thread, but it was kind of while this going. He private messaged me with a podcast hosted by Frank Turek, who is an apologist, and he's terrible. But the episode of the podcast was featuring this Edward Fesser or Phaser, F-E-S-E-R, who is also an apologist and apparently has a degree in philosophy. Wikipedia, and I think teaches, let's see, an American associate professor of philosophy at Pasadena City College, and a visiting assistant professor of philosophy at Loyola. And there's there's praise for him apparently from the National Review, that esteemed philosophical journal, right? And Review of Metaphysics. I wonder what that is. Anyway, I don't care, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But he does have, it looks like, a PhD in philosophy, and he listened to the podcast episode. It's an hour long. I've posted a link to it in the description box on this video. There are 5 arguments for the existence of God that are offered in a book that recently published or had published, and and some of them are very similar to the some of the arguments that Trey makes. One of the things that not do is first of all, there were no objections in the discussion on the podcast. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that Turek of what Fesser's arguments were. But yeah, and I'd be curious to see if Turek could even articulate back any one of the 5. One of the things that Trey has recently said to me is that his arguments are so simple that a child could understand them. That's a testable claim, and I challenged him back after he had said that. Let's get some children. I don't even care what age. I would go as for quote unquote children. Guarantee you that a majority of children that age or younger would not be able to comprehend it, and even is incomprehensible anyhow, that no one has been able to comprehend, because they're gibberish in some cases, some of the things that he spouts out and relies on in his conversations. And Trey, if you disagree with that, by all means, jump in. I don't know if you're watching or not. I've got a few people watching. I wish that you were here to defend yourself, but you're not. Where was I? And Fesser. So the other thing, one of Fesser's arguments was kind of this need for causation, kind of a metaphysical causation that underlies causation, and he used there's all five of them were so similar. I mean, I'm all off here now, and I've heard the same arguments or arguments in the same vein a number of times before, and it's been a while since I've had exposure to the different categories of arguments for the existence of God, theistic arguments like that, to know or remember what class they are, but they are all in the same kind of class of I could think they're ontological arguments for the existence of God, but I don't. Yeah, I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that one. But in any case, the argument is that if there was just one cause or one potentiality or one instance of what's the I forget the other thing, but anyway, that you have to have this other thing there. So you have to have the metaphysical cause or reason behind it for it to make sense. Well, the responded to one criticism that is leveled apparently by secularists or atheists, saying that these underlying causes or nature are just brute facts, and that there is nothing than those further things down beyond that. And their response was, well, it can't be. And that was just because reasons, and that there has to be something more than that. They're just asserting a brute fact for the existence of their God, and he doesn't need an explanation. So it's all special pleading. And I pointed this, or I mentioned this, that we didn't get into this, but this was the whole reason that this Hangout even came about, was that I posted on there that I said, there's special pleading, and what was the other thing that he let's see. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I probably should have had this up. I'm listening to the podcast you sent me with Fesser. Question begging. I forget exactly what the question begging was. It was on one of the arguments. It was lousy though, and this guy is teaching philosophy I feel bad for students. And, maybe in other areas of philosophy, he does better. But there's I don't think that this is a well received or well acknowledged. It's probably these arguments do great in and um, among theologians and things, but uh, prominent or well received among philosophers, because they of special pleading and question begging. But anyway, that I would have liked to go through some of this more with Trey. Trey's position, when you kind of push back on Trey and say, well, there you could have an infinite chain of causality. Trey's response is that somehow that's a violation of identity or the law of non-contradiction, and I've quite sure that I have heard him use both of those laws. Although the last time we had an exchange in one of these threads on Facebook, he mocked me for saying that was what he has said in the past. When I think I said law of identity or whatever, and he said, no, it's the law of non-contradiction. How, if we've gone over this so many times, how can you say? But I've heard him, and they're virtually interchangeable. They mean slightly different things, but they're both tautologies essentially. And anyway, I did not hear this Dr. Fesser make any reference to the law of non-contradiction or not law of identity in relation to that. The other argument that he offered was that they have these eternal of logic and mathematics and things, and they are true and eternal, and that you can't have eternal things that are material, because they would be changing, and these are eternal truths. And if they're immaterial, only two possible accounts of them. He said it has to be either the Platonic realms. They are mind dependent. Then it has to be the mind of this eternal deity, and that's their God, of course. But it's a contradiction to say that on a mind, but they're also necessary. And so he was saying, well, it's necessary and it couldn't be otherwise. That A equals A, and not A does A does not equal B, or whatever. The laws of logic necessary and unchanging. Well, then they're not dependent on something. And this is my. They're dependent as being understood lines, but in some sense they're true regardless of whether there's a conscious that can comprehend them. So it's there's no reason that we need a mind. They're concepts, can be realized, and if there's no one there to realize that they're necessarily true, then yeah, there's no one there to realize that, and that's neither here nor there. But they, you end up with symbols that represent these things. Well, the symbols being there are there for us to communicate and pass that information along, and explain it to people. But this, they're not dependent on the symbols. The symbols aren't eternal. It's the same thing with the minds. If the symbols aren't there, we may not be able to communicate them if we don't have the language or the symbols to communicate them properly. But the fact that one person has it and the other person doesn't have it has no bearing on the validity of the ideas or whatever. If no people understood them, they would still be valid, and in some sense, they it's not dependent on anything. You don't need a mind. You don't need this magical, mystical thing. I don't know enough about Platonic realms. I mean, I know that it's not well in philosophical circles today. That you kind of have these essences or whatever floating around out there somehow. And the reason that they're not very, I mean, there's no dog that's real and true in some eternal sense. Come in all shapes and sizes. There was a time, looking at our fossil record, when there were no dogs, and now there are more dogs than there used to be, and they're of different shapes and sizes and things. It's virtually impossible to say all dogs have X or all dogs are whatever. I mean, dogs usually have 4 legs. They usually have 2 ears and 2 eyes, and many dogs have tails. And you can kind of say these things could be or could likely be properties of dogs, but and they interbreed with other dogs. But if you have a Great Dane and a Chihuahua, can't interbreed those, but they're both dogs. They're very, very different. Anyway, so are out there. They don't need to be mystical, whatever. It's just it's things that in order to have language and thought components for us to be able to communicate with each other, we come to that realization in part because we have become so dependent on language, and part of who we are as living creatures. But and if we go away and there are no thinking living creatures on this planet, the ideas, presentations of those ideas will be lost on this planet. There are thinking beings on other planets, and they have language. Probable that they have some similar concepts, but it could be that there's no one that knows or understands the concepts that these eternal mathematics or laws of logic and things. They aren't represented in people's brains or in symbols or whatever. If that's the case, big deal. They're kind of out there to be seen when and if there are thinking beings that can realize them. I think I'm going to wrap it up, and sorry, this was probably less interesting, a lot less interesting than if it would have been if Trey had manned up enough to come and have a conversation with me. Could dominate me again. Exciting. Anyhow, and take care.